Most organizations don't have a talent problem. They have alignment problems. Smart people, good intentions, but the work still doesn't move the way it should. This is the People Dividend. I'm Mike Horne, and today I'm joined by Liane Davey, team effectiveness expert and author of the best-selling book, The Good Fight, and You First. Liane, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really glad to have this conversation.
You've spent years working with teams across industries, across countries, across leadership levels. When you step back from that work, what's the pattern? What consistently gets in the way of teams actually performing?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and each book that I've written has sort of tackled one. So the book You First that you mentioned tackled the first problem, which is individuals don't seem to take accountability for how a team functions. So people say, why did you write a book about teamwork called You First? I said, because everybody's busy blaming everyone else for why the team doesn't work. So accountability, every individual feeling some ownership of the team's performance was the first thing that got in the way. When I sort of got through that, the next big stumbling block I came to was we're afraid to have conflict. We are in a lot of conflict debt, and teams are not getting where they need to get to, both in terms of trade-offs and return on investment and productivity and performance, but also in terms of engagement and trust, because we're afraid of conflict, getting into conflict debt. So that was the next book. And now my new book that's just coming out came to a third problem, which is that it's not so much the workload that is stopping teams from being effective. It's what I call the thought load. And thought load, I think, is the biggest thing interfering with teams today, which is very high cognitive demands, very high emotional burdens, and very little energy left to carry that load. And when we have high thought load, we can't be creative. We're not even present, so it's very hard to collaborate effectively. We can't kind of share and empathize and take on our colleagues' challenges because we're so burdened by our own. That's, if I think about my career, and I guess I wrote You First in 2013. So over the sort of 15 years of these three books, about every 5 years, I get on to some new insight about what's stopping teams. So each of those, I think, is an issue, and different teams are stuck in different places. But I think in today's world, it's this thought load problem that's the biggest problem for teams.
Well, so interesting. And I want to take that a little further and really work through one of the ideas you're known for. It is that teams don't fail because of conflict, they fail because they avoid it.
Yep. Exactly.
And I think it runs counter to how most organizational leaders think. So where does that avoidance show up?
Yeah. So, first of all, avoidance is mostly genetically baked into us as humans. We've had 15,000 years of evolution that made us apex predators because we cooperate better than anybody else. So we like to go along to make sure we're not voted out of the cave. And it shows up in we don't want to have the contentious, difficult conversation to make a trade-off. We want everyone to be able to get a little bit of the resources and hopefully do enough with their little bit. So we like to spread resources like peanut butter because it feels more fair. So we avoid the conflict about trade-offs and therefore don't get return on investment. Humans are wired to experience profound social pain when we kind of differ with one another or we get information or feedback that somehow we stand out from the rest of the group. And so we don't deliver feedback. We don't share the uncomfortable message. So it comes from a lot of different places, but it's extremely costly because business requires us to go through that struggle of incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands multiple times a day. So if we're avoiding them, we're leaving some huge conflict and it's a major problem for teams.
For sure. And it does remind me of Bion's work, Flight, Fight. I mean, we still live that. But I want to take it at a team level, Liane, and think about the costs at the team level. When teams avoid those conversations or when there's a peanut butter spread, what happens? What's the cost when teams avoid those conversations?
Yeah, so I can think of a real executive team I was working with in a very large grocery retail chain. Each of the members of the team had something really important they were trying to do. So one member of the team was trying to launch a credit card for the organization. And obviously a credit card, when it's hard to make money in groceries, but easy to make money in credit cards.
Sure.
And so they were advocating to ask every person at the checkout to fill out a credit card application. But at the same time, somebody else on the team was responsible for new store footprint, the build out, and they wanted to ask every person at the checkout for their zip code. So they could see where were people coming from, where should they build the stores. And they also had somebody at the table who is responsible for all their corporate social responsibility and wanted to ask everyone for a donation to the children's charity that they support. Now, this team ideally should have had a productive conflict about what's the most important thing we can ask a customer for right now, or how do we determine which one thing we ask any given customer for. And they just didn't want to have that conflict, and including the CEO, who was not willing to force that conflict. And so they just said, they're all important. All three of those things are important. And they left that conflict debt. They didn't address it. They let that conflict debt cascade down till it was the cashier making minimum wage, having to make the call. Do I ask for all three of these things while I have grocery shoppers 6 deep with melting ice cream and screaming children? Like, do I pick one, and which one, and did I pick the right one? And, it was really unfortunate. So this is for a massive, massive organization where the cost was, a bunch of things. A, they got way fewer applications for the credit cards because that was the last thing the cashier was going to ask for if they had a choice, because it was the most cumbersome. But they also, imagine what it does to engagement when then the store manager is keeping track of how many credit card applications and kind of flogging the staff for not getting enough of them. So morale issues, engagement issues, trust issues. So it shows up in myriad ways when a team is unwilling to have the productive conflicts that are necessary to do business.
Well, let's move into that, because you talk about the idea of the good fight. Let's make that practical. What does productive conflict actually look like inside a team, inside an organization?
Well, let's start with what it feels like, and then we'll talk about what it looks like.
Okay, great.
So one of the problems is, as humans, we often decide whether something is good or bad based on, is it painful or not painful? And so if something's painful, that must be bad. We should avoid it. And unfortunately, that litmus test doesn't help us when it comes to conflict, because conflict is uncomfortable. It's how our brains are wired. It's painful. It's what we call social pain that does have the exact same brain network as physical pain. So we can't use that. So we need to use a different way of asking, what does good conflict feel like, and how do I differentiate it from bad conflict? Good conflict feels like tension. I think about it as feeling like doing yoga. When you get that stretch and you're like, I'm not sure my body goes that way, and ow. But as you're doing it, it's making you stronger, it's making you more agile, and it's leading somewhere positive. So it's definitely painful, uncomfortable, but it's a productive discomfort. Let's contrast that with the pain of a blister, friction. And friction, which is wearing you down, slowing you down. So what does it look like in a team? Productive tension in a team looks like, okay, I've heard that plan evaluated from the perspective of your frontline employees. Now let me add the perspective of what how that's going to land in head office. Right? It's a more generative, open conversation with curiosity and empathy and possibility, versus friction in a conflict is, well, that's not true, or you're just saying that because that's what will, make you more powerful, or, it's more personal. There's less listening. You're going around the same issues over and over again with nothing constructive, no forward momentum. So that's what we want to do, is we want to get away from our natural inclination to evaluate based on, is this painful or not painful, or comfortable or not comfortable? That's not helpful. And instead move to is this a discomfort that will make me stronger and better? Or is this a discomfort that's wearing me down and slowing me down? So we want tension and we want less friction.
Interesting. I mean, having been part of a few executive teams, a member of a few executive teams, my experience is that most executives, most CEOs, people in the C-suite, say that they want open dialogue. They want healthy
About
debate.
other people.
Yeah, but in practice, yes, they often shut it down. Why does that happen? Is that the same feelings, or?
Yeah, because I would say executives are exactly the same amount of human, but with about X the things riding on it. Right? Like, so same human, same assessment of risk and vulnerability, But now the risk and vulnerability is instead of 10 people knowing you made a mistake, 10,000 will know you made a mistake. Instead of a mistake costing a couple $1,000s, it could cost a couple million or a couple $100 million. And so that assessment of risk, the fear, the threat response is just same human, but amplified across much higher stakes. But they've also learned how to kind of mask that and pretend that it's, a substantive issue or comes from the numbers or the evidence. It's like, no, they still make decisions based on what they believe and what they feel. They tend to be a little bit more talented at curating a set of facts that makes them feel good about how they feel. But don't kid yourself. Executives, no matter how senior, are still making decisions based on what they feel and what they value and what they believe, justifying that with whatever numbers or facts they can bring to bear.
And sometimes it's not numbers or facts, it's
Yeah,
the
sometimes it's do
pressure
it
from
because I
other
said so.
sources. Yeah, exactly. At the core of this show, Liane, is a simple idea. It's the idea that people drive performance. But when teams aren't aligned, that performance breaks down. In your experience, Leanne, what do leaders misunderstand about how alignment actually happens?
Yeah. So I think you can, and I talk a lot about this in the new book, Thought Loads. So you can pay attention to three things as a leader: activity, output, and outcome. Activities is just, what you're doing. Output is what you create, the finished product. And outcome is the change you make in the world. And the biggest mistake leaders make is that they're too focused on activity. Are people busy? Are they responsive? Are they doing stuff? Are they staying late? Are they grinding? And if you pay attention to activity, all you're going to get is busy people, and busyness tends to cause misalignment. We all just follow the trails, the email trails and the Slack chains in, madly off in all directions. The first change we need to make is going from paying attention to activities to paying attention to outputs. And only in that shift can we go from busy to productive. But the big trap that I'm most worried about right now is that productivity itself is a massive trap, because then we are aligning people to efficiency and to output with no attention to whether those outputs are moving the needle on the things that matter. So only when you shift away from focus on outputs to focus on outcomes do we create alignment around the right thing. So that's the biggest message that I have for people right now, is that we have got to stop focusing on output and productivity and focus on, are we aligned about the outcome we are trying to create? Then we can leave a lot of room for specialists and functions and individuals to figure out what outputs will get us there. But we just aren't paying attention to outcomes. And as long as we stay trapped in the productivity trap, we're just never going to get effectiveness.
Probably so important in the encroaching era of AI and organizations. And yeah, I want to think about this in terms of decision making. I mean, what
Yeah.
I've noticed in hyper growth organizations, I've been lucky to be part of a few of them, is that decision making, the ability of teams and leaders and organizations to make decisions, is often one of the greatest impediments to organizational growth, because every decision in an organization moves through people.
Yeah.
And if conflict is
So
avoided,
far.
yeah,
So far.
so far, right. If conflict's avoided, then what happens to decision making?
It just stalls completely. So the first thing I'll say is that one of the biggest problems causing that is people believe that teams make decisions, and teams do not make decisions. It is one of the most common sources of dysfunction and lack of performance in our organizations, is this mistaken belief that a team should make a decision. So a single person should make a decision, and a team should be there to support an effective deliberation. So what we want is the team there believing that I need to contribute something, probably that is in productive tension with what the other people in the room are bringing, so that the decision maker has the right insight, the right clarity, the right information to then confidently make a good decision. But as soon as you believe the team makes a decision, you add tremendous amounts of time. You get to what's the old adage that a camel is a horse designed by a committee? You get some horribly suboptimal decision because you're trying to have it be something that works for everyone. So, I think one of the most important things for decision making is to say that individuals decide, teams deliberate, and we want to teach teams how to deliberate with a lot of productive conflict, but then leave it so that the decision owner can say, all right, I feel confident. Thank you. I'm now going to take this and make the decision. So most teams are not there yet. I still see like this, especially on agenda, you'll see agenda item and then purpose of the agenda item, decide, right? And you're like, no.
Yeah, this is all really built around, in some ways, single points of accountability. What
Yes.
I've noticed with one very successful executive with whom I had the good fortune to work and who was involved in Apple back in the Steve Jobs days and involved in Google back in the days of the brothers and involved
Yeah.
in his own company, is that he would take the executive committee after important decision that he'd poll everyone. It was kind of primitive, right? But ask the members of his team to all raise their hands, yes, no, whatever. And he would always say, but I own the final decision here.
Let's
And,
be clear.
I'll take your input and, usually I'll agree, but maybe not. But there's so much pressure today to move quickly, to keep things efficient. And at what point does just avoiding conflict, is sort of the antithesis to the example I just described, start to feel faster, but actually slows the organization down?
So commonly, almost everywhere, right? So it feels fast. So, you still hear 20 years in my career later, like we have silos. Like, well, how does that show up? Well, the one team works away on this thing, not showing it to the next team down the chain because they don't want to hear their concerns and they don't want to have to change it and iterate based on their feedback. So they just wait till it's too late and then throw it over the wall to the marketing team or whatever, to the sales team who's like, nobody wants to buy this. So that's just conflict debt. That's just like, it's way faster for R&D team if we don't talk to marketing first. Like, well, it's faster at first, but of course, if you put a product out into the market that no one ever wanted, or maybe they wanted it had value, but no one was willing to pay for, it's ultimately going to slow you down. So silos is the old-fashioned way we talked about it, but now just screaming Chicken Little about sense of urgency is how the modern way that we say, I don't want to hear your dissent. I don't want your productive tension because this is too urgent. We don't have time for that. And it's crap. Like if you don't have time for the thing to fail, then you do have time for an effective deliberation.
I remember in technology companies, often there was the production of vaporware that nobody had really agreed on. But for my audience, for all of the leaders who are in the audience listening today, what's one shift? And this may be the next to the last question. What's one shift they can make immediately to
Yeah.
improve how their teams operate?
Yeah. So the thing that I immediately work on is to go around the room and help each role in the room understand their obligation to conflict. So I just ask 3 questions. For your role, what's the unique value you bring that no one else in the room brings because of your expertise, your experience? What are you paying attention to no one else is paying attention to? That's question 1. Question 2, which stakeholders that aren't in this room are counting on you to advocate for them? And you'll find different people around the table are thinking of and advocating for different stakeholders. And then third, what is the tension you're obligated to put on our deliberations? If you just do that and simply reframe so that everyone in the room knows it's their job, their obligation to put tension on the deliberations, it goes from me, raising a dissenting point of view is me not rowing in the same direction, that sort of negative interpretation, to, oh, that's me doing the job that everyone's counting on me to do. So that's the one thing I start with every team if I'm trying to get more productive conflict, is make sure everyone understands what and whom they're fighting for. It makes a huge difference.
Boy, that's great. Tell our audience, when can we find the new book? Where can we find out more
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah. So Thoughtload is in fine bookstores everywhere, May 19th. And Thoughtload, so just thoughtload, all one word.com. And there's all sorts of information there. And if you have questions, just Liane Davey on LinkedIn, just shoot me a note. But I'm super excited because I think when we have a high thought load, that's when we get into conflict debt. We can't pay attention to any more than we already are. We can't risk being emotionally triggered any more than we are, and we just don't have the energy for it. So if we want the benefit of productive conflict, if we want to get our teams out of conflict debt, we're going to have to manage their thought load first.
Well, that's great. I can't wait to pick up my copy of Thought Load. And I really appreciate this conversation, Leanne. Just so helpful to all of us in the audience, to the HR professionals thinking about shaping organizations and shaping better places for people to work. So thank you so
HR has
much.
such an important role to play in this. This is the audience that I am very excited to talk to because they can steward this much better than most.
Well, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And this is the people dividend. If you're serious about performance, start with people. And until the next episode, stay well.